Have you ever poured your best years into a company, sacrificing weekends, missing family dinners, only to be discarded like yesterday's trash? I lived through that nightmare. 5 years of loyalty meant nothing when they called me into that conference room and ended my career with a cold smile. But what my manager didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I held something in my possession that could bring their entire house of cards crashing down. One document. That's all it took to watch the color drain from their faces and the room fall into absolute silence. My name is Emily Dawson, and for 5 years, I called Redwood Logistics my second home. Located in the heart of Silverton, Ohio, the company's gleaming glass towers had once represented everything I'd worked towards since graduating college. At 34, I wasn't just another employee pushing papers. I was the senior operations coordinator who knew every shipment route, every client preference, every seasonal pattern that kept our Midwest distribution hub running like clockwork. The morning commute from my apartment on Maple Street to the office had become as natural as breathing, 23 minutes door to door, unless there was construction on Route 42. I'd make that drive at 6:30 a.m. sharp, beating the morning rush, coffee in hand, NPR on the radio, discussing market trends I'd later reference in meetings. Those early mornings weren't mandated, they were my choice. Getting in before everyone else meant I could prep the daily reports, check overnight emails from our West Coast partners, and have solutions ready before problems even landed on anyone's desk. My desk sat on the 7th floor, positioned perfectly between the executive offices and the main operations floor. From there, I could see the loading docks below where trucks lined up like ants, each carrying products that I'd helped route to stores across 3 states. The worn spot on my desk chair told the story of countless late nights spent reconciling inventory discrepancies, mediating between angry vendors and frustrated warehouse managers, turning chaos into order with spreadsheets and phone calls that stretched long past sunset. I remember the exact moment I realized Redwood had become more than just a job. It was during the 2021 supply chain crisis when everything went sideways. While other coordinators panicked, I worked 18-hour days, personally calling alternative suppliers, negotiating rates that saved us hundreds of thousands, creating routing algorithms on my laptop at 2 a.m. because our systems couldn't adapt fast enough. My daughter Sophie's school play happened without me. My husband Mark ate dinner alone more nights than I could count. My sister's birthday party became another apology text. Sorry, crisis at work, we'll make it up to you. But I told myself it was worth it. Every sacrifice was an investment in our future. The company appreciation awards lining my cubicle wall proved I was valued. The quarterly performance reviews consistently marked exceeds expectations meant something, didn't they? Richard Hale, my direct manager, would pat me on the shoulder after particularly grueling projects, saying things like, "Don't know what we'd do without you, Emily. You're the glue holding this place together." Those words echoed in my mind during missed Sunday brunches with my parents. During Sophie's soccer games, I watched through FaceTime. During anniversary dinners postponed because something came up at work. I wasn't just building a career, I was building security for my family. Proving that a kid from small-town Ohio could make it in the corporate world through sheer determination and loyalty. The break room conversations with colleagues had evolved from polite small talk to genuine friendships. Janet from accounting knew exactly how I took my coffee, 2 sugars, oat milk, in the blue mug with the chip on the handle. Tom from IT would save me the last banana from the fruit delivery every Wednesday because he knew I forgot to eat lunch when quarterly reports were due. Even the security guard, Marcus, knew my car by sight and would wave me through the gate with a smile, joking about my dedication to the cause. 5 years, 60 months, roughly 1,300 days of choosing Redwood Logistics over almost everything else. My personnel file was thick with commendations, successful project completions, and glowing peer reviews. I'd trained 7 new hires, created 3 different operational manuals that became company standard. And my emergency contact list had more work numbers than family ones. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I chose to ignore. The promises of promotion that always seemed to evaporate when positions opened up. The way Richard would take credit for my solutions in board meetings while I sat silent in the corner. taking notes. The casual mentions of budget constraints whenever I brought up my overdue raise. But I pushed those doubts down, buried them beneath the weight of my next deadline, my next project, my next opportunity to prove myself indispensable. That's the thing about loyalty. It blinds you to the fact that corporations don't have hearts. They have balance sheets. And on one cold Thursday morning in November, I was about to learn exactly where I stood on theirs. The email arrived at 9:47 a.m. on a Thursday that had started like any other. Please report to conference room B at 10 a.m. Mandatory meeting. No subject line, no explanation. Just Richard Hale's name in the sender field and that clinical, emotionless directive. My stomach dropped before my brain could process why. After 5 years, you develop an instinct for corporate atmospheres, and something about this felt wrong. I saved the spreadsheet I'd been working on, ironically, a cost efficiency report that would save the company $40,000 annually, and made my way to the conference room, each step feeling heavier than the last. Conference room B was the one they used for serious discussions. No windows, soundproof walls, a long mahogany table that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights like a mirror. Richard was already there, seated at the head of the table, his navy suit pressed to perfection, his expression carved from stone. Beside him sat Patricia from HR, a folder placed precisely in front of her, her practiced neutral smile doing nothing to ease the Arctic chill in the room. "Emily, please sit," Richard said, gesturing to a chair that felt miles away from where they sat. No small talk, no buffer. The air conditioning hummed like a death rattle. I sat down, my hands finding each other in my lap, fingers interlocking to stop them from shaking. Patricia opened her folder with deliberate slowness, each page turn echoing in the silence. Richard leaned back in his chair, that same chair he'd sat in when he'd promised me a promotion 6 months ago, when he'd praised my exceptional dedication to the Redwood family. "Emily," he began, his voice carrying the rehearsed quality of someone who'd practiced this speech in the mirror. "As you know, the current economic climate has forced us to make some difficult decisions regarding our operational structure." The words hit me like physical blows. Economic climate, difficult decisions, operational structure. Corporate euphemisms designed to sanitize what was about to happen. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. The room seemed to tilt. 5 years condensed into those 7 words. Every overtime hour, every solved crisis, every moment I'd chosen this company over my life, reduced to a line item being crossed off a budget. "I don't understand," I heard myself say, my voice sounding foreign, distant. "Last quarter, my performance review, you said I was essential. You said..." "The decision has been made at the executive level," Richard interrupted, his eyes focused somewhere just past my shoulder, unable or unwilling to meet my gaze. "This is not a reflection of your performance. It's simply a necessary restructuring." Patricia slid a packet across the table. "Your severance package," she said, her voice professionally sympathetic, like a funeral director explaining casket options. 2 weeks' pay, continuation of health benefits through the end of the month, and of course, we'll provide a positive reference for your future endeavors. 2 weeks, 5 years compressed into 2 weeks of pay. "What about the Morrison project?" I asked, grasping for something, anything that might make this make sense. "I'm the only one who knows the vendor contacts, the implementation timeline." "We'll manage," Richard said. And there it was, a flicker of something in his expression. Not regret, not sympathy. It was satisfaction, barely concealed, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings," Patricia continued, checking items off a list. "Your company laptop, access badge, and parking pass need to be surrendered before you leave the premises. Your email and system access have already been deactivated." Already deactivated, while I'd been sitting at my desk, working on saving them money. They'd been deleting me from their systems. "Do I get to say goodbye?" I asked, thinking of Janet, Tom, all the people who'd become my work family. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Patricia replied. It's company policy in these situations. These situations, like I was a security threat, like 5 years of loyalty meant I couldn't be trusted to walk out with dignity. Richard finally looked at me directly. And his expression was worse than cold. It was dismissive. Emily, I know this is difficult, but it's business. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had already consumed everything. A security guard I'd never seen before appeared at the door. Patricia stood, closing her folder with finality. Richard was already checking his phone, moving on to his next meeting, his next decision, as if dismantling someone's life was just another Thursday morning task. I stood on legs that felt disconnected from my body. The security guard, his badge read Stevens, waited with professional patience as I signed the papers Patricia pushed toward me, each signature feeling like signing my own obituation. The walk to my desk was a blur of averted gazes and sudden busy work. Word had already spread. My colleagues, my friends, couldn't look at me. I was already a ghost. A cautionary tale they'd whisper about in the break room. Stevens watched as I placed my family photos in a cardboard box. Sophie's kindergarten graduation. Mark and me at our anniversary dinner. My parents at Christmas. The coffee mug with the chip. A stress ball shaped like the earth that Tom had given me as a joke. 5 years reduced to a box that weighed less than my laptop bag. I need to hand over my current projects, I said to Stevens. There are open orders that someone will handle it, he replied, not unkindly, but firmly. At the elevator, I turned for one last look. The 7th floor stretched out before me, my home away from home. The place I'd given everything to, now as foreign as another planet. Richard's office door was closed. The morning continued around me as if nothing had happened. The elevator doors closed, and I descended, each floor marking another piece of my identity falling away. Senior Operations Coordinator, Redwood Logistics employee, the person who solved problems, who stayed late, who cared too much. When the doors opened to the lobby, I was just Emily Dawson, unemployed, carrying a cardboard box through a building where I no longer belonged. The drive home took forever and no time at all. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, engine off, staring at our front door like it belonged to someone else's life. How do you walk into your home in the middle of a Thursday morning carrying a cardboard box full of desk trinkets and explain that your career just evaporated? Mark's car wasn't there. Small mercy. Sophie was at school. I had until 3:30 to figure out how to tell my 8-year-old daughter that mommy wouldn't be going to her important job anymore. That the office she'd visited last Take Your Child to Work day was now off limits. The house felt suffocating in its normalcy. The breakfast dishes I'd left in the sink that morning, planning to wash them after work. The sticky note on the refrigerator reminding me about Sophie's parent-teacher conference next week. The calendar on the wall with Q4 planning meeting circled in red for tomorrow. A meeting I'd never attend. I set the cardboard box on the kitchen table and stared at it. 5 years of professional life condensed into this pathetic collection of personal items. The family photo from Sophie's birthday mocked me with our frozen smiles, taken during one of the rare weekends I hadn't been checking emails. The shame hit first, hot and nauseating. Then came the anger. Building like a storm system moving across the flat Ohio plains. I grabbed my laptop, my personal one, thank God, and started doing the math. Mortgage payment, $1,847. Car payments, $586. Sophie's piano lessons, $200. Groceries, utilities, insurance. The numbers stacked up like accusations. 2 weeks of severance. That's what 5 years of 60-hour weeks had bought me. My phone buzzed with texts from former colleagues who'd somehow already heard. Janet. I'm so sorry, honey. This is insane. Tom. Can't believe they did this. You want to grab a drink? But there was one name conspicuously absent from the flood of sympathy. Richard Hale. Richard. The more I thought about him, the more the pieces started forming a pattern I'd been too busy, or too trusting, to see before. There was that time 6 months ago when he'd asked me to prepare the quarterly budget report as a learning experience. I'd spent 3 days on it, creating something comprehensive and bulletproof. He'd presented it to the board himself, never mentioning my contribution. When the CFO praised the thoroughness of the analysis, Richard had simply smiled and accepted the compliment. Or, last year's vendor negotiation crisis. Richard had been out of his depth with the Morrison account, drowning in technical specifications he didn't understand. I'd stayed until midnight 3 nights in a row, creating a detailed breakdown, scripting his talking points, essentially handing him the solution wrapped in a bow. The successful negotiation had earned him a bonus. I'd gotten a Starbucks gift card and a pat on the head. The pattern became clearer with each memory I excavated. Every time Richard had looked incompetent, I'd been there to save him. Every triumph he'd claimed had my fingerprints all over it, carefully erased. I'd been so focused on being a team player, on proving my worth, that I'd never questioned why my worth never translated into advancement while Richard climbed steadily upward. I opened my personal email and started searching for evidence of my contributions, forwarding everything to a new folder I titled Evidence. Corporate emails I'd BCC'd to myself out of habit. Project timelines that showed my involvement. Thank you messages from clients that Richard had never seen because they'd gone directly to me. Then I remembered the Ashland Industries proposal. My fingers froze over the keyboard. Richard had asked me to draft it 2 months ago. A complex restructuring of shipping routes that would save a major client hundreds of thousands annually. But after I'd submitted my draft to him, he'd returned a revised version for me to clean up and finalize. His revisions had seemed odd at the time, inflating certain costs, adding unnecessary middleware vendors. I'd questioned it once, and he'd snapped that I didn't understand the bigger picture. I'd kept my original draft. Professional habit, maybe, or some instinct for self-preservation I hadn't consciously recognized. I searched through my personal drive until I found it, then pulled up Richard's revised version that I'd saved before sending it to the client. Side by side, the differences were stark. My version, clean, efficient, honest. Richard's version, bloated with hidden costs that would benefit. I had to read it twice to believe it. The middleware vendors he'd added were shell companies. I recognized one of the addresses. It was the same as Richard's cousin's consulting firm, the one he'd mentioned at last year's Christmas party after too many whiskeys. This wasn't just taking credit for my work. This was fraud. My hands trembled as I copied everything to an external drive. 5 years of being the good soldier, the reliable one, the person who never questioned orders. But I'd kept receipts without even realizing it. Digital breadcrumbs that told a story I was only now beginning to read. The front door opened. Mark stood there, home early from his shift at the hospital, his face already prepared with sympathy. Someone had told him. Of course they had. Silverton was a small city, and bad news traveled at light speed. He started, crossing the kitchen in 3 strides, wrapping me in the kind of hug that threatened to break the dam I'd built around my emotions. They threw me away, I whispered into his shoulder, like I was nothing. You're not nothing, he said firmly, pulling back to look at me. You're everything. To Sophie, to me. This is their loss. But it wasn't just their loss. It was my mortgage payment, Sophie's college fund, the vacation we'd planned for next summer, the security I'd killed myself to build. What am I going to do? I asked, the question hanging between us like a weight. Mark glanced at my laptop screen, at the documents pulled up, at the external drive blinking as it copied files. His expression shifted from sympathy to something sharper. What is all this? I looked at the evidence spread across my screen. Years of work, years of being used, years of Richard's lies documented in black and white. I'm not sure yet, I said, but that wasn't true. I knew exactly what this was. It was my ammunition. And for the first time since being escorted from the building, like a criminal, I smiled. The document that changed everything was buried in a folder labeled Ashland Q3 Restructure, Final. I'd discovered it 3 days into my unemployment, after I'd exhausted myself scrolling through job boards and sending resumes into the digital void. It started innocently enough. I was organizing my files, trying to create a portfolio of my work to show potential employers. When I noticed the discrepancy, the Ashland proposal had two versions in my personal drive, my original draft and Richard's revised version. But there was a third file I'd almost forgotten about, the executed contract that had actually been sent to Ashland Industries. Richard had been sloppy. He'd sent me the final version to proofread, probably forgetting that I'd keep a copy. When I opened it, my blood turned to ice water. The numbers didn't match either version we'd discussed. The transportation costs had been inflated by 30%. The consulting fees for the shell companies Richard had inserted were even higher than in his revised draft. But here was the smoking gun. At the bottom of page 12, in the signature block, was Richard's digital signature authorizing the inflated budget, and below it, a note attributing the cost analysis to E. Dawson, Senior Operations Coordinator. He'd used my name to authorize fraud. I sat back in my chair, the weight of realization pressing down on me. This wasn't just about inflated costs or skimming from the company. Richard had deliberately created a paper trail that led back to me. If anyone ever investigated, if Ashland ever audited the contract, whose name would they find on the fraudulent analysis? Mine. My laptop screen blurred as tears of rage welled up. The termination wasn't just about cutting costs. Richard had needed me gone before someone noticed the discrepancies. A terminated employee couldn't access the systems to defend herself. A disgruntled ex-employee's claims would be dismissed as sour grapes. But Richard had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was as careless with documentation as he was. I had everything. My original clean proposal with timestamps proving it was created first. Email chains showing Richard requesting specific changes. The revised version with his comments embedded in the metadata. And now, the final fraudulent contract with my name attached to his crime. The external drive I'd been using to back up my files suddenly felt like it was radioactive. This wasn't just evidence of workplace misconduct. This was evidence of federal wire fraud. The Ashland contract was worth $3.2 million. The inflated costs totaled nearly $400,000, funneled through shell companies to God knows where. Mark found me at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., surrounded by printed documents, my laptop screen filled with highlighted PDFs. You need to sleep, he said gently. But I could see the concern in his eyes. I'd barely eaten in 3 days, surviving on coffee and righteous anger. Look at this, I said, sliding the contract across the table. Page 12. Look at whose name he put on the authorization. Mark studied the document, his expression darkening as he understood the implications. This is... He set you up. He set me up as the fall guy, I corrected, my voice surprisingly steady. If this ever came to light, I'd be the one facing federal charges. The unemployed, bitter ex-employee who'd been cooking the books. You have to take this to someone, Mark said immediately. The FBI, the state attorney. With what credibility? I interrupted. I'm the woman who just got fired. Richard's still there, respected, trusted. Who's going to believe me? But even as I said it, I knew I had something Richard didn't expect. Meticulous documentation spanning 2 years. Every email, every draft, every revision, every timestamp that proved the evolution from my legitimate proposal to his fraudulent contract. I pulled up another document on my laptop, a spreadsheet I'd created tracking all the projects Richard had taken credit for, all the times he'd asked me to help out with something beyond my job description. The pattern was clear. The Ashland contract wasn't an isolated incident, it was the boldest move in a long pattern of using me as both workhorse and potential scapegoat. There's more, I told Mark, opening another folder. The Morrison account, the Peterson restructure, the warehouse consolidation project. Every time. He had me create the initial proposals, then he'd revise them to add these inflated costs. And every time, he made sure my name was somewhere on the paper trail. Mark whistled low. How much are we talking about total? I'd done the math 3 times to be sure. Over the past 18 months, close to $1.3 million in inflated costs across 7 major contracts. The number hung between us, heavy with implication. This wasn't petty theft or minor corruption. This was systematic fraud that could bring down not just Richard, but potentially damage Redwood Logistics' reputation beyond repair. Mark said carefully. This is dangerous. If Richard's stolen that much, if he's that desperate to cover his tracks, firing you might not be the end of it. He was right. A man who'd steal over $1 million wouldn't hesitate to destroy me completely if he thought I was a threat. But he'd already destroyed my career, my reputation, my sense of self-worth. What else did I have to lose? I looked at the digital signature on the fraudulent contract. My name typed beneath Richard's authorized theft. He'd tied me to his crime without my knowledge or consent, made me complicit in his fraud while I was working 60-hour weeks to keep his department running smoothly. I need to make copies of everything, I said, my decision crystallizing. Multiple copies, physical and digital. Then I need to figure out how to use this. You mean report it to the authorities, Mark said. But it wasn't really a question. I thought about Richard's satisfied smile as security escorted me from the building. The way he'd said nothing personal like he was ordering coffee. The 5 years I'd given to that company, to him, only to be discarded and framed simultaneously. Eventually, I said, saving another copy of the files to a cloud service. But first, I want him to know that I know. I want to see his face when he realizes his perfect plan has one fatal flaw. What's that? Mark asked. I looked up from my laptop, feeling something cold and determined settling into place where my loyalty used to live. He underestimated me. The law office of Brennan & Associates occupied a modest suite in downtown Silverton, far from the glass towers of corporate law firms. That's exactly why I chose them. Margaret Brennan had built her reputation defending whistleblowers and taking on corporate corruption cases that bigger firms wouldn't touch. She listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in precise handwriting. When I finished laying out the evidence, the contracts, the inflated costs, the shell companies, my name fraudulently attached to the authorization, she leaned back in her leather chair and studied me with sharp gray eyes. Ms. Dawson, what you have here is certainly compelling, she said carefully. But you need to understand something. Proving corporate fraud isn't just about having documents. It's about surviving the counterattack that will come the moment you reveal what you know. What counterattack? I asked, though I suspected I knew. Character assassination. They'll paint you as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. They'll claim you were fired for cause, that you're fabricating evidence, that you were actually the one committing fraud. She tapped the contract with my name on it. This signature block, Richard was clever. He's created plausible deniability for himself while implicating you. The weight of her words settled over me like a cold blanket. So what do I do? You have 2 options, Margaret said, folding her hands on the desk. Option 1, we go to the authorities immediately. FBI, State Attorney General, Securities Commission if Redwood is publicly traded. Let them investigate. Hope they see through Richard's setup. And option 2. A slight smile crossed her face. We use Redwood's own internal whistleblower policy against them. Every company of their size is required to have one. You file an internal complaint first, force them to investigate. It creates a paper trail, prevents them from claiming they didn't know about the fraud, and most importantly, it gives you protected status. They can't retaliate against a whistleblower, even a former employee who's following proper channels. I thought about it for a moment. But wouldn't that just give Richard time to cover his tracks? He's already had time, Margaret pointed out. You've been gone nearly a week. If he was going to destroy evidence, he would have done it by now. But here's what Richard doesn't know. The moment you file that whistleblower complaint, the company is legally obligated to preserve all relevant documents. Any destruction of evidence after that point becomes obstruction of justice. The plan started to take shape in my mind. When would I file this complaint? That depends. Is there a venue where you could maximize impact? A board meeting, perhaps? Somewhere Richard can't control the narrative. I pulled up Redwood's investor relations page on my phone. There's a quarterly board meeting in 10 days. They're usually held in the main conference room, and according to company policy, any stakeholder can request to address the board with 48 hours' notice. Are you a stakeholder? Margaret asked. I smiled for the first time in days. I have a 401k with company stock. That makes me a shareholder. Margaret's expression shifted to something almost predatory. Perfect. We'll prepare your formal whistleblower complaint. File it 48 hours before the meeting. That gives them just enough time to panic, but not enough time to mount a coordinated response. Over the next week, I barely slept. Margaret and I crafted the complaint with surgical precision, each allegation backed by documentary evidence. We organized everything chronologically, creating a narrative that showed not just the fraud, but the systematic way Richard had positioned me as the fall guy. Mark watched me transform from devastated to determined. You're different, he said one night as I reviewed documents for the 100th time. I spent 5 years being the good soldier, I replied, highlighting another discrepancy in Richard's numbers. Following orders, never questioning, always assuming the best intentions. That woman got thrown away like trash. So who are you now? He asked. I thought about it, looking at the mountain of evidence I'd assembled. The external drives backed up in multiple locations. The cloud storage with encrypted copies, the physical documents in Margaret's office safe. I'm someone who knows the truth, I said. And more importantly, I'm someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Margaret had coached me extensively on what to expect. They'll try to intimidate you. They'll question your motives, your mental state, your competence. Don't engage emotionally. Stick to the facts. Let the documents speak for themselves. But there was one aspect of the plan I hadn't told Margaret about. One piece of evidence I'd held back, even from my lawyer. It was too damaging, too nuclear to reveal unless absolutely necessary. 3 months ago, Richard had gotten drunk at a company dinner and sent me a series of texts at 1 a.m. Most were incoherent, but one stood out. You make me look good, Em. Don't know what I'd do without you cleaning up my messes. Good thing nobody looks too close at the numbers, right? I'd saved that text, screenshot it, backed it up. At the time, I'd thought it was just Richard being inappropriate after too many drinks. Now I understood it for what it was, an admission of guilt, sent to the person he was simultaneously using and framing. The night before the 48-hour deadline, I sat at my kitchen table with everything prepared. The formal complaint was ready. Margaret had reviewed it one final time. The evidence was organized, indexed, and copied. Sophie came downstairs for water, finding me surrounded by papers. Mommy, are you working on something important? I pulled her into my lap, kissing the top of her head. Yes, sweetheart. Something very important. Is it for your job? I thought about how to answer that. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's scary. She nodded solemnly, with the wisdom that only 8-year-olds possess. Like when I told the teacher that Bradley was cheating on the spelling test? Exactly like that, I said, hugging her tighter. Sometimes we have to speak up, even when powerful people don't want us to. After she went back to bed, I opened my laptop one more time, reviewing the complaint that would either vindicate me or destroy what was left of my professional reputation. Richard thought he'd eliminated a threat when he fired me. He was about to learn that he'd created something far more dangerous. A woman with evidence, legal protection, and absolutely nothing to lose. I hit send on the email to Redwood's board secretary, officially requesting time to address the board as a shareholder with a formal whistleblower complaint. The war was about to begin. The morning of the board meeting arrived gray and cold, fitting for what was about to unfold. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy blazer I'd worn to my first day at Redwood 5 years ago. Full circle, I thought, smoothing down the fabric. Margaret met me in the parking garage beneath the Redwood building. Remember, she said, handing me the leather portfolio containing our evidence. You're protected under whistleblower statutes. They cannot prevent you from presenting this information. If they try, we have grounds for immediate legal action. They know I'm coming? I asked, though the answer was obvious. Oh, yes. Your request has apparently caused quite a stir. My contact says Richard has been in emergency meetings all week. Good. Let him sweat. Security was waiting for us at the main entrance. Not Stevens this time, but two guards I didn't recognize, their faces professionally blank. Ms. Dawson, Ms. Brennan, one said, checking his tablet. You're expected in the executive conference room. This way, please. The elevator ride to the 15th floor, higher than I'd ever been allowed before, felt both eternal and too quick. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady on the portfolio. The executive conference room was intimidating by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The mahogany table could seat 20, and the walls displayed awards and accolades earned by Redwood over its 40-year history. The board was already assembled, 7 members in expensive suits, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Richard sat to the right of the CEO, Daniel Morrison. He looked different, hollow-eyed, his usual confidence replaced by something brittle. When our eyes met, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jump. Ms. Dawson, Morrison said, his tone neutral. We've received your request to address the board regarding a whistleblower complaint. You have 15 minutes. 15 minutes to destroy Richard's career and save my own reputation. I opened the portfolio with deliberate calm. Thank you. Mr. Morrison. Board members, I'm here to report systematic fraud totaling approximately $1.3 million over the past 18 months, orchestrated by Richard Hale and deliberately structured to implicate me as the responsible party. The room erupted, board members leaned forward, Morrison's eyebrows shot up, and Richard started to stand. This is ridiculous, he began. Mr. Hale, you'll have your opportunity to respond. Morrison said coldly, Continue. Ms. Dawson. I pulled out the first document. Exhibit A, the original Ashland Industries proposal I created, dated September 15th. Clean, efficient, saving the client money while maintaining our profit margins. I slid copies across the table. Exhibit B, Richard's revised version, adding $400,000 in costs through shell companies connected to his family members. Richard's face drained of color. Those are fabricated. Exhibit C, I continued, my voice growing stronger. The executed contract with my name fraudulently attached to the authorization, despite the fact that I never saw or approved these inflated numbers. The CFO, Sandra Willis, was examining the documents with laser focus. These shell companies, she said slowly, Midwest Logistics Consulting, Prairie Transportation Services, I don't recognize them from our approved vendor list. Because they're not real companies, I said, sliding another document across. They're registered to the same address as Hale Consulting, owned by Richard's cousin, Marcus Hale. The room had gone deadly quiet except for the rustling of papers. Richard's hands were clenched on the table, knuckles white. This pattern repeats across 7 major contracts, I continued, laying out each piece of evidence with prosecutorial precision. The Morrison account, the Peterson restructure, the warehouse consolidation, each time. Richard had me create legitimate proposals, then altered them to include inflated costs, always ensuring my name appeared somewhere in the documentation. These are baseless accusations from a terminated employee. Richard started. About that termination, I said, pulling out my employment records. 5 years of exemplary performance reviews, not a single disciplinary action, terminated without cause during supposed restructuring. Yet my position was posted on LinkedIn 3 days later with a different title. Morrison's expression had shifted from neutral to thunderous. Richard, you told us the position was eliminated. It was restructured. Mr. Hale. The board's legal counsel interrupted. Did you or did you not alter Ms. Dawson's proposals to include these additional vendors? The silence stretched like a taut wire. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. I pulled out my phone. I have one more piece of evidence. A text message from Richard, sent 3 months ago. I read it aloud, my voice steady. You make me look good, Em. Don't know what I'd do without you cleaning up my messes. Good thing nobody looks too close at the numbers, right? The winky face emoji sounded particularly damning when read to a room full of executives. Sandra Willis stood abruptly. I need to audit every contract Richard has overseen in the last 2 years. Immediately. That won't be necessary, Richard said suddenly, his voice desperate. I can explain. Please do, Morrison said, his tone arctic. Richard looked around the room, finding no allies. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, and everyone could see it. It wasn't supposed to. I had debts. Gambling debts. They were threatening my family. I just needed... You needed to steal $1.3 million from this company? Morrison's voice could have frozen hell. And frame Ms. Dawson for it? I want my lawyer, Richard said, slumping in his chair. You'll need one, the legal counsel said, already pulling out his phone. I'm calling the FBI. This is federal wire fraud. Morrison turned to me. Ms. Dawson, on behalf of the board, I apologize profoundly for what you've endured. Your termination is reversed immediately, with full back pay and benefits. Thank you, I said, standing and gathering my documents. But I won't be returning to Redwood. I've accepted a position as Director of Operations at Pemberton Industries. They appreciate employees who value integrity. The shock on their faces was worth every sleepless night I'd endured. I'd spent the previous week interviewing, my story and evidence making me a hot commodity among Redwood's competitors. However, I continued. I'll be pursuing legal action for wrongful termination, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Ms. Brennan will be in touch. As security arrived to escort Richard from the building, the same humiliating walk I'd endured, he turned to me with pure hatred in his eyes. You destroyed everything. No, Richard, I said, my voice calm and clear. You destroyed everything the moment you decided I was expendable. I just documented it. The moment I placed the portfolio on the table, the atmosphere in the room shifted like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Every eye was fixed on the documents spreading across the mahogany surface like evidence at a crime scene. Which, in essence, they were. Sandra Willis, the CFO, had pulled out her reading glasses and was examining the contract line by line, her finger tracking the inflated numbers with the precision of a surgeon finding cancer cells. 2 other board members were huddled over the shell company documentation, their whispers growing more urgent with each revelation. Richard's attorney-crafted composure finally cracked completely. This is a setup, he burst out, standing so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. She had access to all these systems. She could have created these documents herself. Sit down, Mr. Hale, Morrison commanded, his voice cutting through Richard's panic like ice. But Richard was beyond reasoning. His carefully maintained executive facade had shattered, revealing the desperate man underneath. You don't understand. Emily had her own login credentials. She could have authorized these changes. Check the system logs. An excellent suggestion, I said calmly, pulling out another folder. I've included the system logs right here. Every revision shows your unique user ID. Richard, every alteration time-stamped during hours when my keycard shows I wasn't even in the building. The legal counsel, a silver-haired man named Harrison, looked up sharply. You kept records of your keycard access? I photographed my entry and exit times every day for the last year, I replied. Call it paranoia, or call it foresight. But when you're consistently asked to work outside your job scope, you start documenting everything. Margaret Brennan spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd dismantled bigger lies than this. My client has also maintained email records showing Mr. Hale specifically instructing her to avoid documenting certain transactions in the standard tracking systems. Would the board like to see those? The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Morrison's face had gone from professional neutrality to barely controlled rage. Richard, he said, each word deliberate and heavy. You told me Emily was let go because of budget constraints. You said her position was redundant. It was strategic restructuring. Stop. Morrison held up his hand. Just stop. Every word you say is digging you deeper. Sandra Willis looked up from the documents, removing her glasses. The forensic audit on these shell companies alone will take weeks. But from what I can see here, we're not just looking at embezzlement. This is conspiracy, wire fraud. And given that some of these contracts crossed state lines, it becomes federal. The reality of his situation finally seemed to hit Richard fully. His legs gave out, and he sank back into his chair, face gray. I want to make a deal. That's not our call to make, Harrison said, already typing on his phone. That'll be up to the federal prosecutors. I watched Richard crumble with a strange sense of detachment. This man had held my career in his hands, had crushed it without a second thought, had tried to frame me for his crimes. Yet seeing him destroyed brought no satisfaction, only a cold sense of justice. There's more, I said quietly, and the room's attention snapped back to me. Richard wasn't working alone. The silence was deafening. Richard's head shot up, his eyes wide with fresh panic. What do you mean? Morrison asked carefully. I pulled out the final set of documents. 3 of these shell companies have secondary signatures. Someone else was approving these payments from the accounting department. I paused, meeting Sandra Willis's eyes. Patricia from HR. The HR representative who'd sat beside Richard during my termination, who'd smiled that practiced smile while handing me my severance package like she was doing me a favor. Patricia Reynolds has been approving irregular payments for the last 11 months. I continued. Always just under the threshold that would require additional oversight, always to the same shell companies. Morrison pulled out his phone. Security, please locate Patricia Reynolds immediately. Do not allow her to leave the building. She's not in today, Sandra said, checking her phone. Called in sick this morning, right after Emily's request to address the board was circulated. Of course she did, Morrison muttered. Harrison, we need law enforcement here now. As Harrison made the calls and the board erupted into damage control mode, I stood quietly, gathering my documents. The tsunami I'd unleashed was just beginning, and the waves would crash through Redwood for months to come. Richard was staring at me, his expression cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been respect. How? He asked hoarsely. How did you know about Patricia? You taught me well, Richard, I said, snapping the portfolio closed. You always said to document everything, to watch for patterns, to cover my bases. I was just a better student than you realized. Ms. Dawson, Morrison said, standing as I prepared to leave. The board will need your continued cooperation with the investigation. My attorney will make me available for any questions, I replied. But right now, I have a daughter to pick up from school and a new job to prepare for. As I walked toward the door, the board members stood, whether out of respect or shock, I couldn't tell. The security guards who'd escorted me up were waiting, but their demeanor had completely changed. One actually held the door open for me. Emily, Richard called out, desperation cracking his voice. You don't understand what you've done. These people I owe money to, they don't care about federal investigations. They'll come after my family. I paused at the threshold, turning back to look at him one last time. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from the company, before you decided to frame me, before you looked me in the eye and said it was nothing personal. Please, he said, and the words sounded foreign coming from him. Your family will be protected if you cooperate with the FBI, Harrison interjected. That's the best deal you're going to get. I left Richard to his fate, walking through the doorway with my head high, behind me. I could hear the chaos intensifying, phones ringing, urgent conversations, the sound of an empire built on fraud beginning its collapse. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, catching my reflection in the polished steel. I looked different, not vindicated, not triumphant, just free. As the elevator descended, my phone buzzed with messages. job offers from competitors who'd heard about what happened, interview requests from journalists who'd gotten wind of the story, Janet and Tom asking if I was okay. But there was one message that made me smile. From Sophie. Mom, did you do the right thing even though it was scary? I typed back, yes, sweetheart. I did. The elevator opened to the lobby, and I walked out of Redwood Logistics for the last time, leaving behind 5 years of my life and a room full of people frozen in the aftermath of truth. The elevator descended floor by floor, each number counting down like the final seconds of Richard's career. 15, 14, 13. How many people on these floors had he fooled? How many had suspected something but stayed silent? 12, 11, 10. My old floor was coming up. 7. For a brief moment, I wondered if my former colleagues were watching from the windows, if they'd heard what had just happened in the boardroom. The elevator continued its descent without stopping. 6, 5, 4. Each floor representing months of my life I'd never get back. 3, 2, 1. The doors opened to the lobby, that same gleaming marble expanse where I'd walked so many mornings with purpose and pride. Now I walked through it with something different, vindication. My heels clicked against the marble with finality. Each step echoed in the vast space, and I noticed people stopping to stare. The security guard at the desk, Marcus, the one who used to wave me through with a smile, stood up straighter as I passed. He nodded once, respectfully, and I saw it in his eyes. He knew. They all knew. The revolving door expelled me into the November afternoon, cold air hitting my face like freedom itself. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back at the building that had been my second home, my prison, my battleground. Somewhere up on the 15th floor, Richard was probably being read his rights. Patricia was likely already on a flight to nowhere, though she wouldn't get far. The FBI had a funny way of finding people who thought they could run from federal fraud charges. My phone rang. Margaret Brennan. Emily, I just got off the phone with Redwood's legal team. They're offering a substantial settlement. Very substantial. They want this to go away quietly. I looked at my reflection in the building's glass facade. Tell them no. Emily, we should discuss. No. Margaret, they don't get to buy my silence. Not after what they did. This goes to court. All of it. Public record. There was a pause. Then I could hear the smile in her voice. That's what I hoped you'd say. Richard was arrested 20 minutes ago. Patricia was caught at the airport. The FBI is very interested in your cooperation. They'll have it, I said, finally turning away from the building. All of it. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with another message. This time from Daniel Morrison himself. Ms. Dawson, I want you to know that every contract Richard touched is being reviewed. Every employee he terminated is being contacted. What you did today saved this company. If you ever reconsider returning... I deleted the message without finishing it. Some bridges, once burned, illuminated the path forward. The drive home was surreal. The same route I'd taken that horrible Thursday when my world had collapsed. But now everything looked different. The trees were bare but standing strong. The sky was gray but not oppressive. Even the traffic seemed lighter, as if the universe itself had exhaled. Mark's car was in the driveway when I pulled up. He must have left work early. Through the window, I could see him and Sophie at the kitchen table, her math homework spread out between them. Normal. Peaceful. Untouched by corporate corruption and federal investigations. I sat in my car for one more moment, processing what had just happened. 5 years of my life had led to this moment. Not the promotion I'd dreamed of. Not the corner office I'd worked toward, but something more valuable. The truth. When I walked through the front door, Sophie jumped up and ran to me. Mommy, did you win? I knelt down to her level, looking into those bright eyes that reminded me why any of this mattered. Yeah, sweetheart. I think I did. Mark wrapped his arms around both of us, and I felt the tension of the last weeks finally start to release. It's over? He asked quietly. The criminal part's just beginning, I said. Trials, testimony, probably years of legal procedures. But my part? Yeah, it's over. Later that evening, after Sophie was in bed and Mark and I sat with wine on the couch, I pulled up my laptop one last time. There was an email from Pemberton Industries, my new employer. Ms. Dawson, we've been following today's events. We're more convinced than ever that you're exactly who we want leading our operations division. Also, we're implementing new whistleblower protections based on your experience. Your integrity is already making us a better company. I closed the laptop and leaned into Mark's shoulder. Tomorrow, I'd start a new chapter. New company, new position, new possibilities. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in the satisfaction of standing up when it would have been easier to stay down. Of speaking truth when silence would have been safer. Richard thought he'd destroyed me when he had security escort me from the building with my cardboard box of personal items. He thought I'd disappear quietly. Another casualty of corporate ruthlessness. He thought wrong. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the most power. It's the one with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. And sometimes, just sometimes, that one document you happen to save becomes the thread that unravels an entire web of lies. Richard was right about one thing, though. It wasn't personal, it was justice. The next morning's news would carry the story. Major fraud uncovered at Redwood Logistics. Richard's mugshot would be on the business page. Patricia would be caught at the Canadian border. The FBI would praise an unnamed whistleblower for exceptional documentation. But I wouldn't see any of it. I'd be at Pemberton Industries, starting fresh, building something new on a foundation of truth instead of lies. Because that's what you do when someone tries to bury you. You become the seed that grows into something they never saw coming. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you're enjoying these revenge stories, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and vindication. And please share your thoughts about Emily's journey. Have you ever faced a similar situation at work? How would you have handled Richard's betrayal? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.